Tired of bloating, fatigue and sluggish digestion? Meet your gut's new best friend, NutriHealth 365's microbiome supplement. Restore balance, boost immunity, and feel amazing from the inside out. Smart delay release capsules, real results. Gut health just got personal.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Monday's episode of Trending, brought to you by NutriHealth 365. I hope you're well. Hope you had a fantastic weekend wherever you are in the world. I'm struggling with a little bit of a cold, so I will apologise if I'm sniffling a little bit. In defence, it has gone to about 2 degrees outside pretty much overnight. It's really dropped temperature here. Had to get the de-icer out this morning for the first time this year, so what do you expect? Right, we're going to talk about two major stories this morning. First one in the first part. And we're going to look at two stories which look completely disconnected, but obviously fundamentally connect when you actually do any research or you just ask a few basic questions. So, immigration has been a topic that's been at the forefront of conversation here in Britain for a long time. In fact, it's been at the forefront of conversation across mainland Europe, in America as well. So it's really a key topic for public interest, and clearly it's a very key topic as well for the cult, for the agenda, because as we've said many times, borders don't matter to them, and that's why we see these kind of issues or these kind of conversations and concerns happening right across the world, regardless of what government is in power in any given country, whether it's a right wing, a left wing, a socialist, a dictatorship, whatever it is. Immigration always seems to be a conversation, and the numbers of people coming into any given country always seems to be a topic of conversation. And that's where, when you get obsessed with fine detail and you don't then take a step back and look at the bigger picture, you can completely lose the plot. And I see this a lot with the so-called patriot movement here in Britain, where they're coming out saying this is all the left wing's problem, the crazy liberal woke left in Britain are causing this, that, and the other. It's like, well, in that case, why is this happening in other countries as well? If this was only happening in Britain and this was an issue that was isolated to our borders, okay, I can kind of get your point. But the fact that it's not, and the fact that this seems to be coordinated, why is that not making you question, actually, is this coming through the left? Are they as much the puppets as we are? And is it being orchestrated by somebody a bit further back? There'll be people within the patriot movement that know that's the case and are there to disrupt and to stop people asking those questions. And there'll also be people in there that unfortunately are just woefully ignorant. And that's why I think it's so important to highlight that this is something that is happening across the world. It's not just happening on these shores. But for today, we're going to focus on Britain in this particular story. So the Home Secretary has been making the news today as she did a series of interviews on Sunday political programmes yesterday. And she's pledged a few different things. So one is she's called for a visa ban on countries that don't take back failed asylum seekers. Okay. So again, we're talking here about legal migration, people that apply for asylum and either get given it or they don't. That's not people that come across the channel, which is most people's main concerns, understandably. Because if you apply for asylum through legal channels, they know who you are, they know your name, they know your birth date, they know the history of your character, whether you've been involved in any crimes or anything like that. If you come across in a boat without any form of identification, which is what happens a lot, hence why we've seen, I say this a lot, hence why we've seen video footage of migrants coming across in these boats, throwing away passports, driving licenses and documentation just before they are picked up by the lifeboat in Dover. Why would you do that? Unless you had something to hide. Not everyone, but a good number. She's also pledged for new, safe and legal routes for refugees. Now, here's the big talking point on this conversation. What constitutes an economic migrant and what constitutes a refugee? Now, the left-wing ideology will probably say I'm disgusting just for saying something like economic migrant, because I'm talking about a human being. I understand that principle. You are talking about a person. However, when you're describing a person who lives in Britain, who is concerned about safety, who is concerned about a number of different things, one of which we'll come to in a second, that's also a person. And that person has paid into the system of this country and therefore should be prioritized over somebody coming into it. The same analogy I would use the other day. You would take care of your own children and make sure their needs were met before you would adopt somebody else's. It's a very similar principle. I'm not diminishing that child, but you would obviously take care of your own first. It's a very similar principle when it comes to any government. This is not about being English. This is not about being white. This is not about being anything. This is, for me, the way that every nation across the world should behave. They should take care of their own citizens first, in the same way that most, you'd like to think all parents, take care of their own children. And then, if they can help others, fantastic. Also, just a quick one, if you had a family and they adopted a child who then came in and caused chaos and disrupted their own children's lives, that would then be reconsidered, wouldn't it? So again, that's another simple one you can apply to here. If you have immigrants coming into a country and not assimilating and changing the dynamic of certain towns and cities, then again, that's a conversation to be had. That doesn't make you a racist. The same conversation could be had if, 1 million Brits who all believed in drinking and eating bacon sandwiches went to live in the Middle East. That would change the dynamic of the town or the city there in the Middle East. And there would be a conversation of people who are natives to that land who would say, is that right? Absolutely. It's not about race, it's about fairness. And I think when it comes down to this conversation around legal migration, firstly, again, this doesn't attack the conversation that people want attacked, which is people coming across the channel, and the fact that there should be a really easy deterrent to start with, should be that anybody that comes across in the channel never, ever has the right to remain. Because immediately there's a deterrent. Because what's the point? Because essentially what you're relying on is that you come across and you sneak out before anybody catches you, which isn't going to happen. So, well, it shouldn't happen. If when you come across in a boat, you know you have no chance of remaining in the country, then immediately that's a massive, massive deterrent from you doing it. Because especially these people that are paying large sums of money to these gangs, it just doesn't add up anymore. Because why would you do that? The second thing, which is very, very important, is to control the numbers. So, when people talk about immigration, they talk about illegal immigration, obviously, but legal migration is also another area to discuss. And the reason for it is because of stories like this one. So, this is a headline from Sky News. Inside the town where 6 out of 7 children grow up in poverty and live in fear of homelessness. Now, this is an area in Teesside, near Middlesbrough, which is one of the poorest areas of the country, and also one of the areas, ironically, that voted out in a highest proportion during the Brexit vote, because they have seen during our membership of the EU how much the towns and cities across the UK, particularly these areas, have declined. These areas are often called the forgotten areas. There is very much a political class in this country of London and the South East, and then everywhere else. Where we live here in the Midlands could be considered the same as well. So, I'm not saying that this problem is entirely down to immigration. However, it is going to be a factor, isn't it? Because again, to come back to the analogy of a family, if you have a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 parents, 2 adults, 2 children, and you can afford that. If then that becomes 2 adults, 10 children, and you've got the same amount of money, are you going to be able to give the same standard of care, the same level of life to all 10 as you were to the 2? So the 2 that are yours, are they going to suffer as a result of the 8 coming in? Well, the answer's obviously going to be yes, because there's only so much to go around. So for me, when it comes to this topic, you can take it a step, even a step further back from anything to do with culture or what immigrants are getting up to and what some are in terms of the crimes that are being committed. Anything to do with religion, anything to do with anything like, you can take it back and just go on a purely economic level. Money only goes so far. So what exactly do you expect to happen? If you've got £10 to look after 5 people, they got £2 each. If you've got £10 to look after 10 people, they've only got £1 each. So the quality of life, the standard of care is of course going to drop. So that's not anything to do with race. That's just basic numbers. So at the same time you're talking about increasing routes for legal migration, which isn't solving the problem of too many people coming into a country and putting pressure on a system. You've got people that are going to be indigenous native Brits who are struggling and forgotten for a number of reasons, I'm sure. But how does that make any sense? How does that add up? How is that fair? That's not fair. I wouldn't expect to move to any country in the world and expect to be prioritized over the citizens who are born in that country. I think the fact that this is even a conversation is mad. I wouldn't expect to be able to move to a country whose infrastructure could not cope with an increase in population. Again, that's not a revolutionary, controversial thing to say. You're not going to have a family of 10 move into a 3-bedroom house, are you? There's not the space. So, again, that's not a ridiculous thing to say. That's a really black and white, obvious thing to say. If there's not the room, if there's not the money, if there's not the public services, if there's not the infrastructure to cope with such a large increase, then that's not a racist thing to say. That's a basic, obvious, practical thing to say. So again, where she's talking about legal migration routes, that doesn't solve most people's concerns, which is that the number of people coming into the country is too many. And also, just a final point on this, there's no grip at the moment on immigration in general in terms of how people are assimilating into British culture, any type of framework where people get, ingrained into British culture, learning English, all of those sorts of things. So you do have completely compartmentalized towns and cities in many places, where you have a certain area of the city that you don't go unless you're a certain demographic, and vice versa in other areas. You have schools where there is complete cliques within people. And I understand that you're going to have a natural situation where people will migrate towards people from their own natural culture. But there has to be a point when there is some kind of assimilation, and there is not. I see it here in the city that I live in. There is areas of this city that I would feel intimidated going. And that's not right. And that's not just, I'm not saying that as a white man, I'm saying that as anyone. There shouldn't be areas in a city where immigrants feel uneasy to go. There shouldn't be areas of any cities where people should feel uneasy to go. If proper assimilation works and integration works, I've got no issue with it. But unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing, and that's not what we have seen. We've seen a situation, and I think this comes from the top, because anybody that dares to talk about these issues I'm talking about today is called a racist. So as a result, that conversation goes underground. And then also, people that are coming in certain demographics anyway, are emboldened to impose, because they know they've got that immediate defense mechanism of anyone that questions me is a racist, and they know the system is on their side. There is a 2-tier policing system. Again, like I've said many times, if you're deliberately trying to stoke some kind of conflict between races, you do exactly what they're doing, which is ignore genuine concerns and wind up both sides. So this is a conversation that, unfortunately, is just going to keep going. It is just going to keep going, because they're not interested in an actual conversation about this because it's not on their agenda. And as we've said previously, they will use this and these concerns about safety and so on as a reason to bring in a digital ID. They already have. They've already argued about the right to work, and the reason they're going to bring it in is that. It's not got anything to do with that. It's to do with control. And in order to bring in the digital ID, which is so unpopular within so many people, whether you're right, whether you're left, whether you're in the middle, whatever you are, pretty much every side has large opposition to this because of the nature of it and the degree it will increase control over our lives. So you've got to give people a reason to back down. And safety, I think, is a massive one. I don't believe it's a coincidence that we've seen all these knife attacks and the attacks on the train the other day and the attack outside the synagogue and the lady in Birmingham that got attacked the other day. I don't believe that's a coincidence. I believe all of that is perfectly timed to bring about that fear within people's minds of, okay, I don't want this, but if this solves this problem, I will suck it up because it's better than walking down the street feeling unsafe. Problem, reaction, solution. It's the plan. It's the way they behave. They rinse and repeat the same techniques over and over again. If they work, they just carry on. And unfortunately, these techniques have worked for years, so why would they try anything different? So I think whatever we see in the media about this subject, nothing's going to change on it because nothing's meant to change on it. This is a great way of winding up the population by ignoring genuine concerns and creating more and more division between populations in towns and in cities. It's a really simple trick they've done. Get everyone fighting each other rather than looking up at the hands that are being pulling both sides, pulling the strings on both sides. And this is why, as I said at the top, it's important to not get too obsessed with individual situations and to take a step back and go, okay, how does this fit with this, fit with this? Why is this happening right across mainland Europe? Why is this happening right across America? Why is this happening in Britain? This is not organic. This is not one group of people. This is clearly orchestrated. So who's orchestrating it? When you start to ask those questions, you start to understand the game. Right, thank you for tuning in with me if you're watching on YouTube or Twitter. I hope you've managed to get through that and not got too frustrated by my sniffing. It seems to have got worse since I started the show. But if you're going to head over to iconic.com, we're going to cover this story around the Epstein Files, which apparently exist again now, and Marjorie Taylor Greene. And also we're going to talk about a filmmaker in America who has said the existence of UFOs is not a debate, it's a certainty. So click the link in the description and I'll see you over there.